gods have limits. That's the detail most people forget. Gods in mythology, in religion, in fiction, they operate inside systems. They have domains. They have rules they follow or are bound by. They have things they cannot do and things they will not do. A god is powerful, but a god is still a thing with a definition. And some characters in anime stopped being definable. They didn't become gods. They became something the word god isn't large enough to describe. Something that sits beyond the categories, beyond the systems, beyond the frameworks that exist to explain what power even means. What makes these characters so genuinely disturbing isn't the scale of their abilities. It's what they stopped being in the process of acquiring them. Because every one of them crossed a line that had nothing to do with power levels. They crossed a line that had everything to do with humanity. And what's left on the other side of that line is something that keeps you up at night. Not because it's evil, because it's simply beyond anything you have the vocabulary to address. Meruem Hunter x Hunter? Meruem was not created to be human. He was designed, engineered by the Chimera Ant Queen from the genetic material of hundreds of the strongest creatures alive. The explicit goal was to produce the perfect predator. And by every metric, that goal succeeded. Meruem is born stronger than any human alive. He doesn't need to train. He doesn't need to develop. He emerges from the womb at his peak and spends the rest of his life only growing beyond it. His nen is instinctive. His tactical intelligence is beyond anything the series has shown before. His physical capabilities are so far past human limits that they don't belong in the same conversation. He kills without hesitation. He views humans as food and fuel and nothing else. And here's where it gets disturbing. None of this is cruelty. It isn't even indifference, it's simply accuracy. From Meruem's perspective, he is being completely rational. He is stronger, he is faster, he is more intelligent. The hierarchy he operates in is not one he invented. It is one that exists. He just happens to be at the top of it. But here's where things get terrifying. Meruem meets Komugi, a blind girl, fragile, completely helpless in any conventional sense. The only thing she has ever been exceptional at is a board game called Gungi, and she beats him. For the first time in his existence, Meruem encounters something he cannot simply overpower. Something that requires him to become better rather than just stronger. And that contact, that specific friction of meeting something he cannot consume, begins to change him. What makes Meruem so genuinely unsettling as a character is the trajectory. He starts as something worse than a god. Something that operates entirely outside human moral frameworks because it was never inside them to begin with. And then, slowly, painfully, he begins to develop something approaching humanity. And the series punishes him for it. The moment Meruem starts to become something recognizable, something you can point to and name, the story closes around him. And what's left is one of the most devastating portraits of potential ever committed to anime. Something that could have been worse than a god chose to become something smaller. And paid for that choice with everything. Because that's the specific cruelty of Meruem's arc. The series builds him as something beyond human reckoning. Something that conventional moral frameworks can't even address because it was never inside them. And then it shows you what happens when that thing reaches toward humanity. It reaches toward warmth. It reaches toward connection. It reaches toward Komugi. And in doing so, it becomes something the story can now hurt. Because things beyond human frameworks cannot be touched by human tragedy. But things that have chosen to feel something can. The moment Meruem becomes capable of love, he becomes capable of loss. And the series uses that against him in a way that is genuinely brutal to watch. This is what separates Meruem from every other being on this list. He didn't stay beyond the category, he climbed down from it, and paid the price that comes with that descent. Madara, Uchiha, Naruto, most antagonists in Naruto want power. Madara wanted to fix everything. That distinction matters enormously. Because a person who wants power can be stopped by removing their power. But a person who genuinely believes they are the only one capable of fixing a fundamentally broken world is not going to stop simply because you defeat them. They will plan around defeat. They will plan around death. And Madara does exactly that. He spends decades building a plan so layered, so intricate, so completely accounting for every possible failure, that by the time anyone understands what he's actually doing, it's already too late to stop it cleanly. But the moment Madara truly transcends into something worse than a god is when he absorbs the Ten Tails and becomes the Ten Tails Jinchuriki. Before that point, Madara is the strongest human alive. After that point, the word human stops applying. His power becomes so absolute that the allied shinobi forces, tens of thousands of the best fighters from every major village, cannot meaningfully slow him down. He creates massive structures from nothing. He absorbs techniques that should be undodgeable. He fights while simultaneously managing an operation that spans the entire world. And here's where it gets genuinely horrifying. He's bored. Not contemptuous, not cruel, bored. Because at the level Madara operates, nothing alive can provide genuine resistance. The gap between him and everyone else is so vast, it's no longer a power difference. It's a categorical difference. Like asking whether a storm is stronger than the people it's washing away. The question doesn't apply. And that categorical gap is exactly what separates gods from the thing Madara becomes. Gods in stories still engage with the world. They are provoked, impressed, angered, moved. Madara isn't moved by anything. He has already seen every possible outcome. He has already decided what the world needs to become. The only question remaining is whether anyone can stop him before he finishes. The answer, almost, is no. And the almost only arrives because of a betrayal within a betrayal within a betrayal. Not because anyone was strong enough to stop him. Because someone who was supposed to be on his side decided not to be. That's the most disturbing thing about Madara's arc. He wasn't defeated by strength. He was undone by the same twisted web of manipulation he spent decades constructing. He built a plan so elaborate that it had blind spots he couldn't see. And those blind spots were exactly where the story found room to end him. A being that powerful, brought down not by power but by the limitations of his own vision. That's not a defeat, that's a lesson. And the lesson is that something worse than a god is still subject to the one thing gods and monsters and transcendent beings all share. They cannot fully account for what they don't understand. And what Madara didn't understand was that people surprise you, even at the end, even when everything should already be decided. Gojo, Satoru, Jujutsu, Kaizen. Gojo Satoru is introduced as the strongest. Not the strongest sorcerer, not the strongest person in the room, the strongest. Full stop. And the series means it. Gojo's ability, the limitless, places an infinite series of reductions between him and anything approaching him. Every attack, every technique, every physical force directed at him reaches him having crossed an infinite number of points. And across those infinite points, it loses all of its energy before it can make contact. He cannot be touched, not by any conventional means, not by any sorcerer alive, not by most cursed spirits. And on the offensive side, his hollow purple creates a technique that literally erases whatever it contacts from existence. Not destroys, erases. The target stops having existed in that space. That specific detail is what moves Gojo beyond the category of god and into something worse. Gods destroy, gods create. Gojo unmakes. And unmake is a verb that doesn't belong in any framework built to describe power. But here's where the real horror of Gojo as a character lives. It isn't what he can do, it's what his existence means for everyone else. Gojo is so powerful that the entire system of jujutsu, sorcery, the institutions, the hierarchies, the careful political balances that have maintained the world for centuries are all held in place by a single question. What happens if Gojo decides he disagrees? Everyone who holds power in that world holds it with that question running underneath everything they do. One man, one disagreement, and the entire structure collapses. That's not a god, that's something worse. Because gods and systems are usually part of the system. Gojo is the reason the system is afraid. And the most twisted detail about Gojo's existence is what it does to the people around him. His students, his allies, the people who fight alongside him. They are technically protected by the strongest being alive. But that protection comes at a cost most of them don't fully articulate. It comes at the cost of knowing that without Gojo, none of them would last. That their survival is not a result of their own strength. It's a result of his presence, and presence can be removed. The institutions that run the jujutsu world understand this better than anyone, which is exactly why they remove it. When the opportunity arises to seal Gojo away, they take it without hesitation. Not because they can fight him, because they can't. And something that cannot be fought cannot be managed. It can only be removed. This is what something worse than a god does to the world around it. It doesn't just dominate the present. Rimuru Tempest, that time I got reincarnated as a slime. Rimuru begins as a joke. A corporate worker dies and reincarnates as a slime in a fantasy world. Small, gelatinous, apparently harmless. The gap between what he looks like and what he becomes is one of the most grotesque power escalations in isekai anime, because Rimuru's ability, Predator, allows him to absorb and replicate anything he consumes. Every creature he absorbs adds its abilities to his own. Every skill, every element, every technique gets added to an ever-growing arsenal that has no natural ceiling. In the early arcs, this produces a character who is progressively stronger than expected but still comprehensible. Then, something happens that breaks the system entirely. Rimuru loses someone he cares about. And in his grief, he decides to become a demon lord. Not a title, not a political position, an actual demon lord, achieved by harvesting 10,000 souls in a single act of retribution. What happens to Rimuru after that moment is terrifying to track. He stops being a character who grows stronger within the rules. He starts being a character for whom the rules themselves become negotiable. He gains the ability to resurrect the dead, to rewrite the laws of the world itself, to create and distribute skills and abilities the way most people distribute tasks. By the later arcs of the series, Rimuru operates at a level where the word God is technically accurate but deeply insufficient, because gods in that world are defined entities with specific domains. Rimuru's domain is everything he has ever consumed, and he never stops consuming. The horror isn't that he's evil, he's not. The horror is that his goodness operates at such an incomprehensible scale that even his kindness reshapes the world in ways that no individual, no institution, and no existing framework can account for. Something worse than a god doesn't have to be monstrous. It just has to be beyond the vocabulary you have for discussing power. And Rimuru has been beyond that vocabulary for a very long time. The horrifying thing about watching Rimuru's ascent is that it never feels dramatic in the moment. Each individual step makes sense. Each individual absorption seems reasonable given the circumstances. It's only when you step back and look at the full arc that the scale becomes genuinely disturbing. He started as something that could be squashed underfoot. He ended as something that rewrites the fundamental laws of a world. And he did it gradually enough that nobody around him, including the audience, felt the exact moment when things stopped being manageable. That gradual quality is more unsettling than any sudden transformation, because sudden transformations announce themselves. They give you a clear before and after. Rimuru's ascent doesn't. It creeps forward, one absorption at a time, one skill at a time. Until one day, you look up and realize that the thing you've been watching has become something the story no longer has the language to fully contain. Griffith Berserk. Everything on this list so far has involved power that transcended human limits. Griffith's transformation is different, because what Griffith transcends isn't physical, it's moral. Griffith begins as the most compelling human character in Berserk. Charismatic, brilliant, visionary. A man who built an army out of nothing through sheer force of personality and tactical genius. A man that Guts trusted completely. A man that the entire band of the Hawk would have followed into any darkness. Then comes the eclipse, and Griffith uses every single one of them as a sacrifice. He trades the people who loved him, who fought for him, who bled for him, in exchange for transcendence. He becomes Femto, one of the five God-hand, a being of pure concept rather than physical form. An entity that exists at a level that conventional power can't reach because conventional power is operating inside a system that Femto now stands outside of. But here's where Griffith becomes something worse than a god specifically. Gods, even dark gods, usually operate on principle. They want something. They move towards something. Femto wants the dream. Not power, not control, not survival. The dream he held as a human, the kingdom he always wanted, the destiny he always believed was his, continues to drive him even after he has shed everything that made him human. And that continuity, that thread connecting the human Griffith to the transcendent Femto, is the most disturbing thing in Berserk, because it means that everything he became was always inside everything he was. The betrayal wasn't a transformation, it was a revelation. The man Guts trusted was always capable of this, always. And that is the nightmare that never fully goes away, no matter how many years pass after you finish Berserk. Not the monsters, not the violence. The realization that the most devastating betrayals don't come from enemies. They come from the people you were absolutely certain would never do it. But here's what makes Griffith's transcendence uniquely disturbing compared to everyone else on this list. The others transcended through power, through ability, through systems and techniques and transformations that push them beyond human limits. Griffith transcended through choice. A choice made at the exact moment when the world offered him a way out. He was broken. He had been tortured for a year. His body was destroyed. His dream was apparently gone, and the world offered him a door, a way to step through everything he had lost and emerge as something beyond it. He took it. What makes that choice so genuinely horrifying is how completely understandable the desire is. Most people, pushed to the absolute limit of what they can endure, would want a door out, would reach for anything that ended the suffering and restored the dream. Griffith simply found a door that cost other people everything, and he walked through it anyway. That willingness is what separates Femto from every other form of transcendence in anime. The others became something worse than gods because of what was done to them, or what they chose to pursue, or what their power naturally evolved into. Griffith became something worse than a god because, at the fundamental level, he decided his dream mattered more than the people who had given everything to support it. That's not a power statement. That's a moral statement, and it's one of the most brutal moral statements any anime has ever committed to, because the series never lets Griffith be simply evil. He remains, even as Femto, someone who achieved exactly what he set out to achieve. The kingdom he dreamed of exists. It's real. People live in it. And underneath every good thing that kingdom represents is the foundation of what he sacrificed to build it. That contrast never resolves. It just sits there, permanent. Asking a question, the series refuses to answer cleanly. Was it worth it? And the terrible truth is that for Griffith, the answer is yes. That yes is what makes him something worse than a god. Because gods at least operate within frameworks that include concepts like cost and consequence. Femto doesn't. He stepped through the door and closed it behind him. And everything on the other side of that door was left to carry the weight alone. Final verdict. What every character on this list has in common is a specific kind of transcendence. Not transcendence of power, transcendence of category. Meruem transcended the category of predator by developing something like love. Madara transcended the category of antagonist by becoming a force of nature. Gojo transcended the category of fighter by becoming the reason everyone else is afraid. Rimuru transcended the category of character by absorbing the rules themselves. Griffith transcended the category of human by revealing that he never fully belonged to it. None of them are gods in the traditional sense. Gods are comprehensible. Gods fit inside a framework. Gods can be reasoned with, bargained with, appealed to. These characters cannot. Not because they're evil, because they're operating at a level where the frameworks that produce concepts like good and evil don't fully apply anymore. And that's the real reason they keep you up at night. Not the power. The silence on the other side of it. The place where human categories stop working, and something else entirely begins. Because in the end, the question every character on this list forces you to ask isn't about ability, it's about meaning. What does it mean to be human when something has stopped being one? What do you owe something that has transcended the systems that define obligation? How do you grieve for something that was once recognizable and isn't anymore? These are not questions anime usually asks. These are questions philosophy has been wrestling with for centuries without clean answers. And these characters drag those questions into entertainment, into something you watch for pleasure, and leave behind in you long after the screen goes dark. That's what makes them worse than gods. Gods give you a framework to understand them. These characters take your frameworks away, and leave you standing in the space where the frameworks used to be, asking questions you don't have the words for yet. Because real transcendence has never been about becoming stronger. It has always been about becoming impossible to measure. The moment something can no longer be understood using the language you already have, it stops feeling like a character and starts feeling like an idea. An idea that refuses to leave once it has taken hold. That is why these characters remain unforgettable long after the battles are over. Their greatest moments were never simply the fights they won or the abilities they revealed. Their greatest moments were the ones that forced you to confront something larger than the story itself. Something about ambition, about identity, about loneliness, about sacrifice, about the frightening distance between what a person is and what they are willing to become. Maybe that's why stories like these endure. Not because they show us impossible power, but because they show us what happens when limitless power collides with very human desires. The desire to be understood, the desire to protect, the desire to control, the desire to achieve a dream no matter the cost. those
3
desires
years
never
goes by,
disappear.
and now the
They
band
simply
of the
become
Hawk
magnified
are
until they
inseparable
reshape
friends.
entire worlds.
They have also become
and perhaps
really powerful.
that's the
and
final
Griffith
irony.
is one step closer to
Every one of these
achieving his
characters
dream.
reached a point
Guts is
where
now the
almost
commander
nothing
of
could
the
challenge
band
them
of the
physically.
Hawk.
Yet
And
every
new
one of them
recruits are
remained
coming
defined
in
by
every day.
something deeply
The story
human.
gets complicated
Love,
when one day
pride,
Guts and Griffith almost
isolation,
gets killed
purpose,
by a very powerful warrior
grief,
called the
ambition.
Immortal Zod.
Those weren't
Zod
weaknesses
spots
they
the
left
demonic
behind.
relic that
They were the
Griffith
forces
has,
that carried them
and
beyond
give Guts
everything
a warning
else.
about Griffith.